A biker sneered. "What does a Hollywood star know about us?" The crowd laughed until his engine died in the middle of the veterans' race. What Keanu Reeves did next silenced everyone and left a room full of hardened men unable to speak for 5 minutes. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The morning sun was already high, casting a warm glow across the small-town fairground. It wasn't the kind of place where stars usually appeared, and maybe that was why every head turned when the low rumble of a motorcycle rolled up the dirt road. It wasn't a polished Harley, decked out in chrome and leather. It wasn't a showroom machine meant to turn heads. It was Keanu Reeves on a simple, well-worn bike that carried its miles with quiet dignity. He wore a plain black jacket, no patches, no flashy logos. His boots were scuffed, his helmet scratched, and the machine beneath him hummed with a steady growl that spoke of long roads traveled alone. He cut the engine near the entrance and let the silence settle. The fairground stretched out before him, decorated with rows of American flags fluttering in the breeze. Tents were pitched in neat lines, some offering barbecue plates, others selling patches or handmade crafts. The air was thick with the smell of smoked ribs, gasoline, and sun-warmed leather. Veterans in their 60s and 70s leaned against their bikes, their jackets heavy with insignias and embroidered names, each one telling a story of sacrifice. Younger men and women mingled with them, some in jeans and t-shirts, others still clinging to the discipline of their service days. This was their space, their tradition, and their brotherhood. Keanu walked his bike forward slowly, easing it into a row of machines that looked older but somehow prouder than his own. He swung a leg over and pulled off his helmet. His hair fell to his shoulders in strands still damp with sweat from the road. He didn't smile or wave for attention. He just stood there for a moment, taking it all in, quietly respectful, as though he were stepping into a sacred place. But respect wasn't what he received in return, not yet. The first voices he heard weren't greetings, they were whispers. "That's Keanu Reeves, isn't it? What's he doing here? Must be some publicity thing. He doesn't belong at this race. This isn't Hollywood." A chuckle rippled through a small group standing near the registration table. A tall man with a shaved head, his vest covered in patches from tours in Iraq, nudged the guy next to him. He nodded toward Keanu's plain jacket. "Look at that. Not a single patch. What's he think he's riding into?" More laughter. A few others shook their heads, muttering under their breath. Keanu heard every word, though none of it showed on his face. He'd been in situations like this before, rooms where eyes judged him before he had the chance to speak. This was different, though. These weren't critics or photographers. These were men who had seen real storms. They carried scars he couldn't imagine, and to them, he was just a stranger stepping onto their ground. He moved toward the registration tent, helmet tucked under his arm. The volunteer, an older woman in a denim jacket with a gold star pin, looked up with surprise. You're Mr. Reeves, aren't you?" He gave a small nod. "Just Keanu. Here to ride, if that's all right." Her eyes softened. "Of course. Everyone's welcome." She handed him a form and a race number. Behind him, the murmurs continued. "Everyone's welcome," one veteran repeated, his tone sarcastic. "Doesn't mean everyone belongs." Keanu's fingers tightened slightly on the pen as he filled in his name. He didn't react, didn't defend himself, didn't rise to care. The bait. He had come here for a reason, and it wasn't to win their approval with words. It would take something else. Keanu stepped away from the registration table and found a quiet spot near his bike. He set down his helmet and leaned against the seat, his eyes scanning the fairground. He wasn't looking for attention, just taking in the scene. Rows of motorcycles gleamed under the sun, each one carefully polished, each one carrying history. Many of the riders wore their stories on their sleeves, literally. Patches stitched into their jackets bore names of lost comrades, battles fought overseas, units that no longer existed. It was a moving display of loyalty, of sacrifice, of a bond forged in places far from here. But in the midst of the pride, suspicion lingered. Some men kept staring, their conversations hushed. A group of 3 leaned against a barbecue stand, plates in hand. One of them pointed with his fork. "He's not one of us. He doesn't know what it means to bleed for the guy next to you." Another added, "Bet he won't even make it past the first checkpoint." Laughter followed, sharp and dismissive. Keanu heard, but his face remained still. He understood where it came from. This wasn't cruelty. It was defense. These men had seen outsiders pass through before, curious visitors who wanted a taste of brotherhood but left when it got uncomfortable. They had earned the right to question. What mattered was what happened next. A few children ran past, waving small flags. Their laughter rang out above the murmurs, innocent and bright. One girl, no older than 8, paused near Keanu's bike. She looked up at him with wide eyes, then quickly at her father, a tall man with gray in his beard and a Navy insignia stitched across his vest. "Daddy, that's him, isn't it? From the movies?" she whispered. The man didn't answer, only put a hand on her shoulder and gently guided her away. The girl turned her head back, her eyes still fixed on Keanu, as if she saw something the adults didn't. Keanu's gaze softened. He gave the smallest nod, just enough for her to see, but not enough to draw more attention. At the far end of the fairground, the announcer's voice boomed over the speakers, calling riders to gather. Engines fired up one by one, the sound rolling like thunder. The veterans strapped on their helmets, slapped each other on the back, and prepared for the long ride ahead. The laughter and whispers that had followed Keanu earlier didn't stop, but they shifted. It was no longer curiosity alone. It was challenge. If he wanted to sit among them, he would have to prove himself on the road. Keanu lifted his helmet, sliding it back over his head. He checked the straps, then swung a leg over the bike. His engine came alive with a steady growl, not as loud or polished as the others, but sure and steady. He tightened his grip on the handlebars, eyes forward, heart steady. The road ahead would decide everything. Engines rumbled all around him as the veterans tightened their gloves and adjusted their goggles. The air buzzed with energy, that mix of adrenaline and ritual that comes before any long ride. The announcer's voice carried again, reminding everyone that this wasn't just about the race. It was a fundraiser to support wounded veterans and families who had lost loved ones. The stakes were larger than trophies or pride. For these men and women, it was about honoring sacrifice. Keanu sat quietly astride his bike, letting the engine hum beneath him. He didn't rev it to draw attention, didn't flash a smile or wave. He simply waited, watching the others, respectful of their space. His jacket, plain and unmarked, seemed almost out of place among the decorated vests and jackets covered in emblems. Every patch on those riders meant years of service, years of risk, years of survival. To them, he was the blank page among books already written. Cole, the broad-shouldered rider who had mocked him earlier, leaned closer to his group and raised his voice just enough for Keanu to hear. "Watch Hollywood try to keep up. First curve and he'll be on the ground." His friends laughed, but there was an edge in his tone, as if he wanted the man in the plain jacket to rise to it. Keanu didn't turn. He looked past the crowd, past the fairground, toward the road that stretched into the horizon. That was where this would be decided. Words wouldn't matter. Once the engines roared in unison, the road would strip away pretense, leaving only endurance and respect. The announcer gave the signal for the riders to gather. Slowly, the line formed, dozens of bikes idling side by side, their exhaust curling into the sky. Families waved from the sidelines, cheering for fathers, brothers, and mothers in the group. The little girl who had noticed Keanu earlier pressed herself against the rail, eyes locked on him. Her father kept one arm protectively around her, but even he stole a glance at the man sitting so still, as if wondering what he might show once the ride began. Dust swirled as the pack shifted forward, waiting for the final call. A hush fell for just a moment, the kind of silence that feels heavier than sound. Keanu adjusted his gloves, felt the weight of the eyes on him, and knew this was not just another charity ride. To them, it was a test. To him, it was an opportunity, not to prove he belonged to their brotherhood, but to prove his respect for it. The starter flag lifted, engines revved. The sound was deafening, the ground trembling beneath the combined roar, and as the flag dropped, the veteran surged forward in a wave of steel and thunder. Keanu leaned into his bike, the wind rushing against his face, his focus steady. The journey had begun. The roar of engines settled into a steady rhythm as the riders rolled along the first stretch of country road. Dust rose behind the pack, hanging in the morning air like a trail marking their passage. The fairground was already far behind, but the doubts and glances cast toward Keanu had followed him onto the asphalt. He kept his posture calm, his eyes focused ahead, the vibration of the bike steady beneath him. A few riders pulled into formation, their voices carrying between the engines. They weren't talking about the ride. They were talking about the past, about real battles that had tested them in deserts, jungles, and mountains. "You remember Fallujah?" one grizzled Marine asked the man riding beside him. His voice was deep, gravelly, and rough from years of cigarettes. Sand in everything. Couldn't sleep a night without hearing mortars drop. The man next to him, an army veteran with sun-leathered skin, nodded. "Afghanistan was worse for me. Mountains so high, you thought they were scraping heaven. But the firefights were hell. Lost a brother out there. Never got him back." Another voice chimed in from behind them, an older veteran with silver hair flowing from under his helmet. "Vietnam. Different war, same blood spilled. The jungle never let you rest. The air itself wanted to swallow you." Their words carried over the engines, layered with pride and pain. Each story was a mark on their skin, a memory they carried every day. Keanu listened without interrupting. He didn't try to compare, didn't try to insert his own life into theirs. He knew his stories were of movie sets, long nights on stage, the weight of fame and loss. But those were not the same storms these men had lived through. He let their words pass over him, honoring them with his silence. Cole, the broad-shouldered rider with the sharp voice, let out a laugh that cut across the group. "And now we've got Hollywood riding with us," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "What's he going to tell us? How hard it is to sit in a trailer between scenes?" The words rippled like a stone hitting still water. Murmurs followed. Some chuckled under their breath, shaking their heads. Others glanced at Keanu, waiting to see if he would bite back, if he would defend himself, if he would even care. Keanu's eyes remained on the road. He didn't flinch. He didn't answer. Instead, he gave the smallest nod, one so subtle, most of them missed it. It wasn't a nod of agreement with the insult. It was a nod of acknowledgement. He understood their doubts. He respected their scars. And he wouldn't challenge their place by demanding his own. The laughter softened. Cole smirked, perhaps frustrated that his jab hadn't gotten a rise. The other riders exchanged glances, some thoughtful, some still dismissive. Behind the pack, in the support truck, Emily leaned forward against the glass. Her small hands pressed against the window as she watched the man in the plain jacket riding in silence. Her father sat beside her, his eyes forward, but Emily couldn't look away. She didn't understand all the tension in the air, but she understood patience when she saw it. The pack thundered forward, the road narrowing into long, winding curves bordered by fields of tall grass. The voices of the veterans carried less now as the ride demanded focus, but glances still passed between them. They weren't subtle. Some were sharp with suspicion, others more curious, testing the man who rode silently among them. Cole stayed loud enough for others to hear. He leaned back slightly in his seat and called over the roar of his bike. "Hollywood doesn't get it. Out here, it's not about who you are on a movie poster. It's about who keeps riding when the road fights back." His friends chuckled again, but this time it didn't carry the same confidence. It sounded more like a challenge, thrown into the wind to see if Keanu would finally respond. But Keanu didn't. He leaned into the next curve, body steady, the bike flowing as if the road had been waiting for him. The wind snapped his jacket against him, his eyes calm behind the visor. He wasn't competing with them. He wasn't even trying to impress them. He was simply present, and that presence unsettled Cole more than any reply could have. Further back, two veterans who had served in different wars began trading stories again. One described the cold nights in Afghanistan, how the wind cut through their tents like knives. The other talked about the sweltering jungles of Vietnam, where every shadow might hide an ambush. Their voices carried a tone that demanded respect, not pity. It was survival spoken aloud. Keanu listened, the words drifting over the sound of engines. He didn't look at them, didn't nod dramatically, but something in his posture conveyed that he was hearing every detail. He wasn't dismissing their pain. He was holding it with the same quiet reverence he held for his own losses in life. Emily, watching from the support truck, leaned closer to her father. "Daddy, why are they being mean to him?" she asked softly. Her father's hands tightened on the wheel. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "They've been through a lot, sweetheart. Sometimes it makes you guard your circle tight." Emily frowned, her eyes still locked on Keanu's figure up ahead. But he's not fighting back. He's just riding. Her father glanced at her, then back at the road. He didn't say more, but he couldn't deny what she saw. Keanu wasn't meeting sarcasm with pride. He was meeting it with silence, a silence that held more strength than shouting ever could. The murmurs faded for now, though suspicion lingered. Cole kept casting glances, clearly unsettled that his words hadn't broken through. The road stretched on, and the race was still young. But already, one thing was becoming clear to Emily. The man in the plain jacket wasn't here to play a part. He was here to stay the course, no matter how many doubted him. The road straightened, opening into a long stretch that cut through farmland. Fields of corn swayed on either side, and the riders spread out slightly, enjoying the smoother pace. For a moment, the group looked less like a competition and more like a moving brotherhood. Yet under the surface, doubts still simmered. Cole pulled his bike closer to Keanu's, the rumble of his engine loud as he tilted his head toward him. "You think this is just some Sunday ride? You've never felt what it's like to wonder if every mile might be your last." His voice was sharp, half accusation, half test. The men behind him chuckled again, though their laughter was fading, less sure than before. Keanu turned his head slightly, eyes calm behind the visor. He didn't answer. Instead, he gave a single, respectful nod. It wasn't agreement. It wasn't surrender. It was acknowledgement. He was telling Cole, without words, that he understood the weight of those experiences, even if he hadn't carried them himself. That silence carried more power than any defense. Cole's smirk faltered. He revved his bike and pulled ahead, but the frustration on his face was clear. He wanted a reaction. He hadn't gotten one. The other riders exchanged glances again. Some shook their heads, still unconvinced. Others looked thoughtful, as if Keanu's refusal to play the game had unsettled them in a different way. This wasn't arrogance. It wasn't weakness. It was patience. Behind them, Emily still pressed against the window of the support truck, her wide eyes fixed on the quiet rider. She tugged at her father's sleeve. "Daddy, he's different," she whispered. Her father grunted, keeping his eyes on the road. "Different doesn't always mean good, Emily." "But look," she insisted, pointing. He didn't get mad, he just kept riding, like he knows where he's going. Her father risked a glance. The man's plain jacket, his steady posture, his quiet way of answering insults with nothing more than a nod, there was something undeniable about it. He didn't say anything back to Emily, but a flicker of doubt crossed his expression. Doubt about his own judgment. The pack rode on, the sound of engines rising and falling with the curves of the highway. The tension had not disappeared, but it had changed shape. The laughter was quieter now, the mockery softer, as if the men weren't so sure of it anymore. The silence Keanu carried with him was beginning to spread, making them question whether they had underestimated him. The ride was far from over. Ahead lay tougher roads, unexpected trials, and storms waiting on the horizon. But already, Emily could sense that something was shifting. Her small voice broke the silence in the truck as she whispered to herself, "He's not like they think. He's stronger. The veterans slowed their bikes as the group returned toward the fairground staging area. The first leg of the morning ride had been only a warm-up, a way to get the engines loose and the riders settled into rhythm. Now the real event was about to begin. The announcer's voice boomed again over the speakers, calling everyone to gather near the starting line. Families drifted closer, waving flags and holding signs, children on their fathers' shoulders. The barbecue smoke still hung in the air, mingling with the smell of gasoline and rubber. The atmosphere felt heavier now. It wasn't just a friendly cruise. It was a tradition, a test, and a chance to raise money for those who carried wounds that could not be seen. Rows of bikes lined up across the dirt lot, their chrome gleaming in the sunlight. The sound of engines revving was like rolling thunder, each roar demanding attention. Riders adjusted their helmets and jackets, checked their straps and saddlebags, preparing for the long miles ahead. This wasn't a race of speed, but of endurance, the kind that demanded not just horsepower, but heart. An older organizer stepped up to the microphone. His hair was white, his skin weathered, but his voice still carried authority. Brothers and sisters, today we ride for those who can't. We ride for the wounded, the fallen, and the families who carry their names. The road ahead is long, winding, and unforgiving. But every mile means hope for someone still fighting their battles back home. A cheer rose from the crowd, veterans pounding their fists against their handlebars. The organizer's eyes swept across the line of riders, lingering for a moment when they landed on Keanu. A faint smile touched his lips, but his words carried an edge. And it looks like we've got a special guest with us this year. A man most of you know from the big screen. Not sure if Hollywood bikes the same way we do, but I guess we'll find out. Laughter rippled through the crowd. A few veterans clapped sarcastically, others shook their heads. Cole smirked broadly, his eyes locked on Keanu. Yeah, let's see if he even makes it past the first hill. The announcer raised his hand for quiet. This ride is for everyone willing to honor those we lost. But not everyone makes it. It's long. It's rough. Some of you know better than anyone, machines break down, riders burn out. So, welcome, Mr. Reeves. Hope you're ready to keep up. Keanu gave a small nod, his hands resting lightly on the handlebars. He didn't answer with words, just a steady calmness that contrasted sharply with the noise around him. Emily, standing at the fence with her father, leaned forward on her toes. She cupped her hands to her mouth and whispered to him, though her eyes never left Keanu. I hope he wins. Her father sighed, his expression torn. Winning isn't the point, sweetheart. But Emily didn't move, her small voice carrying more conviction than the engines around her. I think it is for him. Engines idled in a deafening chorus, each machine snorting exhaust as the riders inched closer to the line. The fairground fence rattled with the weight of children climbing to get a better view. The air vibrated with anticipation, a mixture of pride, rivalry, and curiosity. All eyes drifted toward the man in the plain jacket. Cole revved his bike hard, the sound cracking like a cannon blast. He leaned forward, grinning as he pointed his chin toward Keanu. Better hope that fancy bike of yours doesn't sputter out. Out here, no stunt doubles coming to bail you out. His friends chuckled, but their laughter felt forced, an echo of the confidence they had tried to display earlier. Keanu remained still, his posture calm, his hands steady on the bars. He didn't return the grin, didn't reply to the provocation. The silence was answer enough, a refusal to be dragged into games. The steadiness in his face unsettled Cole more than an argument ever could. The announcer raised the starter flag, but before he gave the signal, he added a final warning. This ride ain't about speed. It's about endurance, discipline, and respect for the men and women we honor. Those who quit halfway or ride reckless won't just embarrass themselves, they'll shame the memory of the brothers we lost. The words landed heavily, silencing the jokes. Heads bowed slightly in reverence. Even Cole gave a solemn nod. For all their banter, every veteran present understood the weight of the ride. The road was not just asphalt and turns. It was a symbol of the long, hard miles that soldiers had marched in wars far from home. Emily tugged her father's sleeve again, whispering with urgency, "Daddy, look, he's not scared." Her father followed her gaze. Keanu sat with his helmet on, visor down, posture relaxed but not careless. He wasn't trying to look fearless, he simply was. Something about that stillness made the man hesitate before replying. "We'll see, Emily, we'll see." The starter flag lowered slightly, a signal that the moment was near. Engines roared louder, exhaust filling the air like smoke before a battlefield charge. The line of bikes shuddered as riders leaned forward, anticipation etched into every motion. Keanu exhaled slowly inside his helmet. He wasn't here to prove he was tougher, louder, or faster. He was here to ride for the reason they all were, to honor those who never came home. If the veterans needed him to earn his place, he would do it not with speeches, but with miles. The flag snapped upward, ready to fall. Emily pressed her face to the fence, her heart racing as fast as the engines. She whispered one more time, barely audible above the thunder. "Come on, mister. Show 'em." The announcer's arm swung down, and the starter flag sliced the air. Engines howled in unison as the veterans launched forward, the ground shaking beneath the weight of the pack. Dust rose like a storm. Cloud, swallowing the starting line as the riders surged onto the open road. Cole bolted ahead, weaving aggressively, his laughter swallowed by the roar of his machine. Others followed close, jockeying for position even though the announcer's warning still echoed in the air. For them, the ride wasn't about trophies, but pride lingered in every acceleration. Keanu rolled forward with less urgency. His bike growled steady beneath him, not straining, not faltering. He eased into the flow of the pack, keeping his line clean, his movements smooth. He wasn't chasing anyone, not yet. He was conserving, respecting the road and the riders around him. Spectators cheered as the last of the bikes disappeared over the first hill. Dust settled slowly, leaving families in a hush that felt almost reverent. Emily clutched the fence rail with both hands, her small knuckles white. She watched until the figures shrank to specks on the horizon. Only then did she look up at her father. "Daddy," she whispered, "do you think he'll make it?" Her father let out a long breath, the kind of sigh that carried memories heavier than words. "I think the road's going to decide that, Emily." Back on the highway, the group settled into formation. Riders shouted hand signals, pointing at turns and hazards, as the line snaked through the countryside. It was an unspoken language, a code drilled into their habits through years of discipline. Cole and his friends glanced back often, their eyes searching for Keanu. Every time, they found him still there, steady as a shadow, refusing to fall behind. A few veterans exchanged quiet remarks between the roar of engines. "He's not wobbling, he's keeping pace." Another added, "Doesn't ride like a tourist." The tone carried less mockery now, more curiosity. Cole scowled, twisting the throttle harder, as if speed alone could widen the gap. But the truth was beginning to dawn on those who watched closely. The man in the plane. The jacket wasn't here for show, he was here to endure. By the time the first checkpoint appeared on the horizon, a small roadside stand marked with flags and volunteers handing out water, the pack had stretched thin. Engines coughed, some bikes slowed, and sweat dripped beneath helmets. Keanu rolled in with the group, his posture still calm, his bike still humming with the same steady growl it had carried since the fairground. Emily's voice, though far away in the support truck, might as well have been beside him. "I hope he wins." It was more than hope. It was belief, pure and simple, echoing across the miles. The stakes were set. The road would test every rider, every machine. For Keanu, words no longer mattered. From here on, only action would. The pack thundered down the highway, a rolling wall of engines that shook the ground beneath them. The sun climbed higher, baking the asphalt until heat shimmered in waves. Dust clouds rose behind the riders, their roar echoing off the fields as they pushed deeper into the winding backroads. Cole, ever eager to prove himself, rode near the front, his engine growling louder than most as he leaned hard into each turn. He threw quick glances over his shoulder now and then, checking to see if the man in the plain jacket was still there. Every time Keanu was steady, unhurried but unyielding, his bike humming at a pace that matched the group without strain. The road narrowed through a stretch of forest, the sunlight breaking into sharp beams between the trees. It was there, as the incline grew steeper, that the first signs of trouble began. Cole's bike coughed once, then again, the sound jarring against the steady rhythm of the engines around it. Smoke curled faintly from under the seat. Cole frowned and twisted the throttle harder, trying to push through the hiccup. The machine shuddered, sputtered, and then gave a sharp pop before losing power. "Damn it," Cole growled, yanking the handlebars to the side as the pro. The rest of the pack roared past. He coasted to the shoulder, boots slamming against the pavement to steady the wobble as the bike rolled to a stop. Exhaust hissed, smoke rising like a signal of defeat. The others didn't wait. They surged ahead, too locked into formation to slow down. Engines faded into the distance, leaving Cole alone with the hiss of his failing machine. He ripped off his helmet, tossing it onto the ground with a curse. Sweat streaked his face, anger burning hotter than the sun above. Behind him, another engine slowed. The growl was lower, steadier, until it cut into silence right beside him. Keanu eased his bike onto the shoulder, careful to give Cole space, and killed the engine. He swung a leg over, setting his boots firmly on the gravel, and knelt beside Cole's smoking motorcycle. Cole turned sharply, his pride already raw from being left behind. "Back off, Hollywood," he snarled. "This ain't a movie set. I don't need an actor poking around my ride." Keanu didn't react to the bite, in his words. His voice was soft, calm, carrying none of the heat that burned in Cole's. "Mind if I take a look?" Something in his tone wasn't condescending. It wasn't pity either. It was steady, almost disarming, as though he had asked not to prove himself, but simply to help. Cole blinked, caught off guard for a heartbeat, then narrowed his eyes again. His pride wanted to shove the offer away, but deep down, he knew he was stranded until someone fixed the problem. The silence stretched, broken only by the ticking of the overheated engine. Finally, Cole crossed his arms and muttered, "Fine, do what you want, but don't make me regret it." Keanu crouched beside the bike, his shadow stretching across the gravel. He ran his fingers lightly along the frame, listening to the faint clicks of cooling metal. Smoke still seeped from under the seat, the acrid smell of fuel and oil mixing in the hot air. He didn't rush. He didn't fumble. Every movement was deliberate, calm, as if he were listening to the machine breathe. Cole stood over him, arms crossed, jaw tight. His pride bristled at the sight of the man he had mocked, now kneeling beside his motorcycle. He wanted to say something sharp, something that would cut through the silence, but the look on Keanu's face stopped him. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't amusement. It was focus, the kind of quiet attention of someone who took the problem seriously. Keanu pulled a small multi-tool from his saddlebag, unfolding it with practiced ease. He loosened the bolts on the side cover, sliding it free to reveal the snarled mess beneath. His eyes scanned the lines, tracing the path of the fuel tube, the blackened spark plug, the soot where there should have been clean combustion. He nodded slowly to himself, as though the bike had just confessed its troubles. "Fuel line's clogged," he said softly, almost to himself, "and the plug's fouled." Cole raised an eyebrow. "You a mechanic now?" Keanu didn't look up. "No, just spent enough years keeping my own bikes alive on the road. They talk if you listen." His tone carried no boast, only fact. Cole grunted, his pride tugging at him. He wanted to laugh it off, but something in the steady way Keanu spoke gnawed at his defensiveness. He knelt reluctantly, watching as the actor worked with steady hands, pulling the fuel line free, tapping it gently until a clot of debris shook loose. The silence between them grew heavier. The forest around them hummed with cicadas, the distant roar of the pack fading further into the hills. The world had shrunk to two men, one bike, and a moment of truth. Keanu reached into his own bag, pulling out a spare plug wrapped in cloth. "Keep extras," he explained simply, holding it out. Cole stared at the part, then back at him, suspicion giving way to reluctant surprise. "You carry spares?" "Always," Keanu said, slipping the new plug into place. Never know when a road will ask more than your bike's ready to give. Cole shook his head slowly, half in disbelief. Didn't expect Hollywood to know his way around a socket wrench. Keanu tightened the plug, reattached the cover, and wiped his hands on a rag. He glanced up, his eyes calm. Doesn't matter where you're from. Out here, it's just you and the machine. You take care of it, it takes care of you. For the first time that day, Cole didn't have a comeback. He just watched, a flicker of something respect, maybe crossing his face as the words settled in. Keanu stood and stepped back, giving Cole room to reclaim his bike. The machine sat quiet, smoke no longer curling from the seams, its lines tightened and its heart ready to beat again. Keanu motioned toward the ignition with a small nod. "Give it a try." Cole hesitated, glancing between the actor and the bike. His pride still smoldered, but his curiosity pressed harder. He swung a leg over the seat, slid the key into the ignition, and turned it. For a moment, silence hung in the hot air. Then the engine coughed, sputtered once, and roared back to life. The growl was steady, healthier, as if the machine itself was grateful to breathe again. Cole blinked, gripping the handlebars tighter. He gave the throttle a twist. The bike responded instantly, the vibration strong and sure beneath him. He looked up at Keanu, his jaw set. The words caught somewhere between gratitude and stubbornness. "Didn't think you had it in you," he muttered finally, his tone gruff. Keanu gave a small shrug, wiping his hands once more on the rag before tucking it away. "It's just a machine. You listen, it tells you what it needs." Cole studied him for another long moment, the sneer gone from his face. He still didn't want to admit it, not outright, but the truth was undeniable. Without Keanu, he would still be stranded on the shoulder, cursing his luck while the pack disappeared into the distance. The sound of the support truck rumbled closer. Emily pressed her hands against the window as they slowed behind the two men. Her eyes widened when she saw Cole's bike alive again. She leaned out the open window, her voice carrying with excitement. "He fixed it, Daddy, he fixed it!" Her father gave a small grunt, but even he couldn't hide the surprise in his eyes. He had expected the stranger in the plain jacket to stay silent, maybe even ride on without a glance back. Instead, the man had stopped, knelt in the dirt, and put another rider's pride above his own time. Cole killed the engine and slid off the bike. He stood across from Keanu, silence stretching between them once more. At last, he extended a hand, rough and calloused. "Guess I owe you one." Keanu met his grip firmly, no triumph in his face, no smugness in his eyes, only quiet respect. "We all need a hand sometimes." The sound of engines in the distance reminded them that the pack was still moving. Cole slipped his helmet back on, nodding once. "Let's catch up." Side by side, the two men mounted their bikes, engines flared, gravel spat out beneath their tires, and together they surged back onto the road. Whatever doubts remained in Cole's mind, one truth had already begun to settle in. The man they mocked wasn't here for show. He was here to ride, and he wasn't riding alone. Keanu crouched low beside Cole's bike again, rolling up his sleeves without hesitation. The machine was still hot, the metal biting against his fingertips as he worked the bolts free. He didn't flinch. He knew the sting of grease and oil was part of the price you paid for the road. From his saddlebag, he pulled out a weathered toolkit. The tools weren't polished or new. They were practical, each one marked by scratches, dents, and years of use. He set them out on the gravel in a neat line, every movement deliberate, every choice steady. He eased the side cover free once more and peered into the guts of the engine. The smell of burned fuel and clogged oil hung heavy. His fingers traced the blackened plug, tugging it loose. The piece came out coated in soot, fouled beyond use. Without hesitation, Keanu reached for the spare he had shown earlier, brushing the grit away before setting it into place. Cole stood nearby, shifting his weight uneasily from one foot to the other. Pride still tightened his jaw, but his eyes betrayed him. He couldn't help but watch closely, curiosity pushing through the stubbornness. "You really know what you're doing," he muttered, as if the words burned on his tongue. Keanu didn't look up. His voice was calm, even. "Machines talk. You just have to pay attention long enough to hear them," Cole grunted, folding his arms. Funny way to put it. Keanu slid the fuel line loose, tilting it carefully. A stream of grime and debris spilled out, clogging the gravel at his boots. He tapped it gently, clearing the last of the blockage before reattaching the tube. His hands were blackened now, streaked with grease, but his face remained calm, the work almost meditative. The rumble of engines grew closer. A few riders who had fallen slightly behind slowed as they passed, their helmets turning toward the side of Cole's bike on the shoulder and Keanu working at its side. One laughed, shaking his head. "What'd I tell you? Hollywood fixing engines now?" Another rider smirked but didn't laugh. His eyes lingered longer, thoughtful. He tapped his buddy's arm before revving ahead. The sound of their engines faded, leaving only the hum of cicadas and the ticking metal beneath Keanu's hands. Emily's support truck rolled closer, keeping pace behind them. She pressed her face to the glass again, her eyes wide with wonder. She tugged at her father's sleeve, pointing. "Daddy, he's fixing it! Look!" Her father said nothing. His gaze locked on the man kneeling in the dirt, grease streaked up to his elbows. For the first time that morning, doubt softened in his expression. Keanu slid the cover back into place and tightened the bolts. He wiped his hands quickly on a rag, leaving dark smears but not caring. He gave the fuel tank a gentle pat, as if reassuring the machine. Then he nodded once toward Cole. "Try it now." Cole slid back onto the seat, his movements reluctant but deliberate. He turned the key, half expecting the engine to sputter uselessly again. Instead, it coughed once, then roared to life with a deep, even growl. The sound was smoother, healthier, like a steady heartbeat finding its rhythm again. Cole gripped the throttle, twisting it once, testing. The response was instant, strong and sure. His eyebrows lifted despite himself. "Well, I'll be damned." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Keanu stood to the side, wiping his hands again with the rag, his fingers stained black with oil. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just gave a small nod, the kind that carried quiet assurance. Should hold for the rest of the ride. Just needed some patience. Cole let the engine idle, staring at the man beside him. For so long, he had pictured Hollywood stars as soft, pampered, untouched by real work. Yet here was one, kneeling in the gravel, hands dirty, tools worn from years of use. No camera crew, no spotlight, just sweat, grease, and focus. The support truck idled nearby. Emily leaned half out the open window, waving with both hands. "He fixed it, Daddy, he fixed it." Her voice was bright, cutting through the drone of the engine. Her father gave a short nod, still silent, but the weight in his eyes betrayed what he was beginning to feel. Another pair of riders slowed as they passed, glancing at the scene. One shook his head with a smirk. "Guess Hollywood's got tricks after all." The other rider didn't laugh. He gave a nod toward Keanu, something unspoken passing between men who knew what it meant to get your hands dirty for someone else. Cole revved the bike once more, then cut the engine. He slid off the seat, standing across from Keanu. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, grudgingly, Cole muttered, "Didn't think you had it in you." Keanu tucked the rag back into his bag, his voice even. "It's just a machine. You give it time, it gives you trust." Cole blinked, caught by the words. He shifted on his boots, then shook his head. "Maybe I misjudged you." His voice was low, almost drowned by the cicadas, but the admission hung heavier than a shout. The tension between them softened, replaced by a silence that carried the first hints of respect. Cole looked at his bike, then back at Keanu, his pride still holding tight, but no longer unyielding. The engines of the main pack were distant now, faint thunder on the horizon. Cole sighed and picked up his helmet. "We're falling behind. Let's not make this the end of the road." Keanu nodded once, slipping his toolkit back into the saddlebag. His hands were blackened, his knuckles raw from scraped metal, but he didn't seem to notice. The only thing that mattered was that the bike lived again, and the ride wasn't over. Cole slipped his helmet back on, still shaking his head. He muttered under his breath, but this time there was no sarcasm in it. "Never thought I'd see the day I'd owe Hollywood a ride." Keanu swung a warned, leg over his own bike, the rag still tucked into his pocket. He didn't respond with words, only gave Cole a steady look, a silent agreement that pride didn't matter here. What mattered was the road ahead and the fact that neither of them would be left behind. Cole straddled his bike and thumbed the ignition again. The engine growled strong. No sputter, no smoke. He glanced at Keanu one last time before pulling his visor down. His voice came muffled through the helmet. "Guess I was wrong about you." It wasn't much, but it was the closest thing to respect Cole had given all day. The two engines roared in unison as they rolled back onto the asphalt, gravel spitting from their tires. For the first mile, Cole kept stealing glances across the lane. He wasn't watching to mock this time. He was watching to measure, to understand. The man he had doubted was keeping perfect pace, his posture steady, his machine carrying him forward without complaint. The support truck trailed behind them. Emily pressed her face against the glass again, grinning wide. She waved so hard her little arms ached, her voice high and bright. "Go, mister. Go." Her father caught her enthusiasm in the rearview mirror, and though he didn't say anything, the corner of his mouth twitched in something close to a smile. More riders who had slowed earlier now caught sight of the pair rejoining the line. Some shook their heads, still skeptical. Others raised their brows, impressed despite themselves. The sight of Cole's bike alive again was proof enough that something had shifted. The laughter that had followed Keanu at the start of the day had dulled into quiet curiosity. Cole leaned closer as they rode side by side. His voice carried over the rumble. "Don't think this makes us brothers. Not yet." Keanu's reply was calm, almost carried away by the wind. "Didn't expect it to. Respect's enough." Cole let the words hang in the air, the simplicity of them impossible to deny. The road stretched ahead, winding into hills and curves that promised tougher miles to come. But for the moment, there was no smoke trailing behind them, no sputtering engine, no stranded pride. There were only two riders, side by side, pushing forward with a silence that spoke louder than the roar of their machines. For Emily, watching from the truck, that was enough. She leaned back against her seat, whispering softly to herself, "He's not like the others think. He's real." The two bikes roared back onto the highway, gravel snapping beneath their tires before the rubber caught firm on the asphalt. Cole's machine, once coughing and smoking, now growled with new strength, its voice blending seamlessly with Keanu's steady engine. The sound of the pair together was a low thunder rolling toward the horizon. For the first mile, the only rhythm was the roar of their machines and the rush of wind against their helmets. The forest thinned, giving way to open fields. In the distance, the rest of the pack appeared, their silhouettes blurred by heat rising from the road. Slowly but surely, Keanu and Cole began to close the gap. The main group wasn't expecting to see them again so soon. A few riders glanced back when the rumble grew louder, their eyes widening when they spotted Cole's bike alive once more. Disbelief flickered across their faces. One tapped his buddy's shoulder and gestured back. Another shook his head, muttering something none could hear over the roar of engines. The support truck trailed close behind Keanu and Cole. Emily's small hands pressed against the glass. When she saw them pulling back into formation, her face lit with a grin. She waved frantically, her little voice carrying faintly even through the noise. "They did it, Daddy! They caught up!" Her father kept both hands on the wheel, his jaw set, but he couldn't deny the truth. Against all expectation, the man he doubted had pulled another rider back into the race. Cole leaned forward, testing his throttle, weaving slightly as if to prove his bike was fully alive again. Then he shifted his position closer to Keanu. He didn't speak, but his body language spoke volumes. It was a test, an unspoken challenge. Could this quiet rider handle the pressure? Keanu didn't flinch. He held his line steady, his posture relaxed, but unbreakable. When Cole swerved close in a sharp lean, Keanu matched the road's curve with practiced ease, never veering off balance. His calmness was unshakable, his focus locked not on the challenge, but on the miles ahead. The veterans ahead stole glances over their shoulders. Some raised their brows in surprise. Cole's reputation was one of grit and stubborn pride. The idea that his bike had been saved by the man they had mocked earlier began to sink in. Respect didn't come easily in their world, but the silence in their stares hinted at a shift. The sky above darkened slightly, a gray shadow spreading across the horizon. Clouds gathered, heavy and swollen, the first low rumbles of thunder rolling in the distance. The road stretched forward, winding toward hills that disappeared beneath the coming storm. Emily pressed her hand against the window of the truck, her voice soft this time, almost reverent. "It's not over, Daddy. Look at the sky." And she was right. Trouble wasn't finished with them. The road had more trials waiting, and the storm ahead was only beginning to show its teeth. The rumble of thunder grew louder as the road wound upward into rolling hills. The air shifted, cooler and heavy, carrying the metallic scent of rain before a single drop had fallen. The veterans tightened their formation instinctively, each rider adjusting their spacing in silent rhythm. The group had ridden through storms before, and they knew the language of the clouds. Cole leaned closer to Keanu, tilting his head just enough for his voice to carry over the roar of engines. "Hope you don't melt in the rain, Hollywood." The words were sharp, but the sting had softened. It wasn't mockery now, it was more of a probe, a way of testing if the man beside him would falter when the skies opened. Keanu didn't respond. He simply kept his eyes on the road, his grip steady, his posture relaxed. His silence wasn't empty. It carried the weight of calm certainty. Cole glanced at him once more, then snorted, twisting his throttle and pulling ahead. The road narrowed again, twisting into a serpentine curve. Cole leaned hard into the bend, his tires hugging the line as he darted closer to Keanu's lane, a deliberate move to see if the actor would panic. But Keanu flowed into the curve as though the bike and the road were one. He leaned gracefully, his machine holding the asphalt with perfect confidence. The gap between them shrank, their shoulders nearly parallel, but Keanu never wavered. Cole pulled out of the turn with a grunt of frustration. He had meant to shake him, to knock him off rhythm. Instead, he had found himself the one unsettled. His jaw tightened beneath the helmet. "Damn stubborn," he muttered. The pack began to notice. Glances exchanged mid-ride, helmets tilting toward the two men. It was clear now that Cole wasn't riding alone. He was testing Keanu, and the quiet man in the plain jacket wasn't bending, wasn't braking. He was keeping pace with every sharp move thrown at him. The wind picked up, carrying with it the first cool sting of rain. A few drops splattered across visors and jackets, leaving dark spots that spread quickly into damp patches. The clouds above churned darker, the horizon swallowed by gray. Emily pressed her forehead to the glass of the support truck, her breath fogging the window. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "He's not afraid." Her father glanced at her briefly, then back at the road, his hands tightening on the wheel. He wasn't sure if she was right, but he couldn't deny the man had shown no hesitation. The first crack of lightning split the sky, illuminating the road ahead in a brief, blinding flash. The storm was no longer a distant threat. It was here, and it would test them all. Keanu's gaze never left the road. The storm didn't matter, only the ride did. The rain came fast. What began as scattered drops turned into sheets of water that pelted the riders and drummed against the pavement. Tires hissed over the slick road, throwing up sprays of mist. The storm blurred the horizon, shrinking the world down to the narrow strip of asphalt beneath their wheels. The veterans adjusted immediately, falling into a tighter formation. Each rider knew the danger-slick curves, hidden potholes, the risk of hydroplaning. Signals were passed by hand and helmet tilt, a language of trust built from years on the road and, for many, years in war zones. Cole kept his bike close to Keanu, weaving again, but this time not to mock. He wanted to see if the man in the plain jacket could handle more than dust and sunshine. Every sharp lean, every sudden adjustment, Cole mirrored with sharper precision. Yet each time, Keanu answered with quiet steadiness. His machine cut clean lines through the rain, his body flowing with the motion, never fighting it. The pack noticed. Eyes that once looked back with doubt now lingered longer, the surprise in their stares clear even behind fogged visors. Cole's bike was alive again, and everyone knew why. The man who fixed it was riding steady, unshaken by the storm. Emily's support truck crawled carefully behind, windshield wipers struggling against the downpour. She pressed her palms to the glass, her small voice rising in awe. "Daddy, look at him. He's still going." Her father kept his eyes on the road, but his tone carried a reluctant respect. "Yeah, He's still going. Lightning cracked again, illuminating the riders in a ghostly white glow. Thunder followed a heartbeat later, rattling the air. Rainwater streamed off helmets, jackets, and bikes, soaking leather and cloth until they clung heavy against the skin. But still the engines roared, refusing to bow to the storm. Cole pulled closer, his voice muffled but audible. "Thought you'd slip by now. Guess I was wrong." Keanu's reply came steady, quiet enough that only Cole caught it. "It's not about proving anyone wrong. It's about finishing the ride." The words cut deeper than the rain. Cole blinked behind his visor, his breath fogging the glass. He gave no reply, only pulled slightly ahead, his posture less confrontational now, more aligned. Together, side by side, they pressed through the storm, their engines part of the same thunder that shook the skies. The pack no longer glanced back with smirks. They looked back with something closer to respect, the first cracks in the wall of doubt beginning to show. And above them, the storm raged on, promising that the real test was still ahead. The rain intensified until it felt like the sky itself had split open. Sheets of water hammered down, drenching every rider in seconds. Leather jackets clung to bodies, gloves turned slick, and helmets drummed under the relentless downpour. Visibility shrank with every passing moment. The road ahead blurred into gray, headlights cutting faint tunnels through the storm. Tires hissed against the soaked pavement, sending up constant sprays of water. Puddles formed quickly in dips and cracks, splashing high as wheels sliced through them. Every rider felt the danger underfoot. Traction was fragile, the road unforgiving. One wrong move, one overconfident turn, and the storm would punish them mercilessly. Signals began to flash between veterans. Arms lifted, hands slicing the air, riders pointing down to warn of slick patches and puddles. The line slowed slightly, but the storm pressed harder, blinding even the most seasoned eyes. One rider's bike wobbled dangerously before correcting, sending a ripple of unease through the group. Keanu felt it instantly. He had been listening to the storm as carefully as he had listened to Cole's engine earlier. The rhythm of the rain, the pulse of the road, the struggle of the pack, it was all telling him something. Without hesitation, he eased his bike forward, pushing into the front of the formation. Cole caught the motion, narrowing his eyes. For a second, he almost bristled at the audacity. But then he saw it. The pack was faltering, their signals growing frantic, their cohesion slipping. Someone needed to anchor them, to guide them through, and Keanu wasn't hesitating. At the head of the line, Keanu raised one hand, his movements sharp and deliberate. He signaled to slow, then gestured wide to indicate a lane hazard. The motions were practiced, clean, the kind veterans had used for decades. There was no uncertainty in them. The riders behind reacted instinctively, their trust kicking in before their doubt could catch up. They eased back, corrected their spacing, and mirrored his adjustments. The formation tightened, steadied, and began to flow again as one body instead of a scattered line. From the support truck, Emily pressed her nose against the fogging glass. Her little hands splayed against the window as she watched the pack shift. She didn't know the language of the road, but she saw the way the riders began to move together again, following the man in the plain jacket who now led them. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "They're following him." Her father's jaw flexed as he gripped the wheel tighter. He couldn't deny it. The same men who had doubted, mocked, and dismissed were now moving in unison under the guidance of the one they had laughed at. The storm poured harder, thunder rattling the ground. Yet for the first time since the clouds broke, the formation felt steady, almost unshakable. Their trust had shifted. The storm was no longer scattering them. It was binding them together, and at the center of it was Keanu. The storm raged without mercy. Rain slashed sideways in the wind, pelting riders with stinging force. Helmets fogged from the heat of breath inside, forcing riders to tilt their visors slightly just to see. Every mile became a battle, not against an enemy, but against nature itself. Keanu kept his bike steady at the front, the rain streaming down his jacket in dark rivers. His left hand cut through the air again, signaling a sharp curve ahead. The veterans mirrored the motion, shifting as one body through the bend. Tires hissed dangerously. But the formation held tight, every rider trusting the signals, trusting the man they once doubted. Cole rode just behind Keanu now, his earlier skepticism drowned out by the roar of water and the undeniable reality in front of him. He had spent years earning respect on the road, years proving himself through endurance and grit. But here he was, leaning into each turn under the lead of a man he had sworn didn't belong. His pride twisted in his chest, but his survival instinct didn't care. The truth was clear. The pack needed Keanu's steadiness. One rider in the middle slipped slightly, the back wheel sliding as it hit a deep puddle. Hearts clenched in that split second, the risk of collapse inches away. But before panic spread, Keanu's hand shot up, palm out steady, slow. The formation immediately eased, giving the struggling rider space to regain balance. The skid corrected, the rider exhaled hard, and the line moved forward without a fall. Emily gasped from the truck window, clutching at her father's arm. "He saved him, Daddy! Did you see?" Her father kept his eyes on the storm-blurred road, but his silence admitted the truth he had seen. And in that moment, his doubt cracked a little more. The storm deepened, thunder rolling over them like the echo of distant artillery. For the veterans, the sound stirred old memories. Some glanced at the clouds with haunted eyes. The boom of thunder, a cruel reminder of nights when explosions shook the ground beneath them. But seeing Keanu's hand, signals cut through the chaos, anchored them. The road wasn't a battlefield, it was a ride, and they would finish it together. Cole leaned closer, his voice carrying just enough to reach Keanu. "You keep this up, they'll think you're one of us." His tone wasn't sharp now. It was something closer to respect, though grudging still. Keanu didn't look back. His voice was calm, steady as the rain. "Doesn't matter what they think. What matters is we all make it through." The words sank into Cole's chest, heavier than the storm itself. He gave no reply, only kept writing, his eyes locked on the back of the man he could no longer call an outsider. The rain hammered harder, turning the road into a mirror of water that reflected every flash of lightning. The veterans leaned forward on their bikes, eyes narrowed against the torrent. Fat droplets splashed off their visors, their jackets heavy with water. But the line held together tighter now than it had been all morning. Keanu raised his hand again, signaling to slow as the road sloped downward into a flooded stretch. His fingers cut through the air with crisp precision, every movement clear. The pack responded instantly, throttles easing back, their formation rippling but never breaking. They rode through the flooded dip at a steady crawl, water spraying up around them like waves. No one lost control. Emily's breath fogged the truck window as she watched in awe. "Daddy," she whispered. "They're not laughing anymore." Her father glanced at her, then back at the road, his grip on the wheel tightening. He knew she was right. The veterans who had mocked, doubted, and tested were now leaning on the man in the plain jacket for direction. Cole's bike rode close to Keanu's rear wheel, his visor streaked with rain. For once, he didn't try to weave or crowd him. He stayed right in line, steady, his focus sharpened not on challenging, but on surviving the storm. His pride battled with the truth, but every hand signal Keanu threw, every danger avoided, every moment of control hammered that truth deeper. The man knew what he was doing. Lightning split the sky again, illuminating the entire pack in a stark white glow. For that instant, they looked less like riders and more like soldiers moving through the chaos of battle. The storm became more than weather, it became memory. The veterans knew storms, the kind that raged in foreign lands, storms of fire and steel. And now, under the sky's fury, they saw in Keanu the same steady calm that once kept them alive when everything around them wanted to tear them apart. The miles ticked forward. The rain showed no mercy, but the riders no longer faltered. The storm had forced them into unity, and the man who led them had earned something no words could buy: trust. Emily leaned back from the window, her small voice almost swallowed by the drumming rain. "He's one of them now." Her father said nothing, But in the silence that followed, he knew she had spoken the truth. At the head of the line, Keanu adjusted his grip, eyes locked on the ribbon of road still vanishing into sheets of rain. He didn't smile. He didn't look back. His only focus was forward. The storm wasn't done, but neither was he. And behind him, for the first time, the pack rode not as skeptics, but as brothers, following a leader they hadn't expected to find. The rain blurred the world into streaks of gray. Visibility dropped so sharply that the riders could barely see 20 yards ahead. Headlights shimmered on the soaked pavement, reflecting back like ghostly apparitions. The storm pressed harder, a wall of water and noise, threatening to scatter the formation again. Keanu rode at the front, his bike steady, as if the road were guiding him rather than the other way around. He flicked on his high beams, the bright glare cutting through the curtain of rain in short, sharp bursts. The beams weren't just for him, they were for the riders behind, a beacon to follow when the world around them dissolved into shadows and noise. Every few seconds, his left arm shot out, signaling hazards with crisp precision. A palm lowered flat warned of standing water ahead. Two fingers pointed down, marked gravel washed loose by the storm. A clenched fist in the air slowed the entire pack to a crawl when the road pitched downward into a flooded curve. Each motion was met instantly by those behind him, the riders passing the signals down the line like a chain of trust. The silence of the veterans was striking. No one laughed now. No one muttered sarcastic remarks about Hollywood. Helmets dipped and rose in unison, every rider trusting the movements of the man they had once doubted. The only sounds were the roar of engines, the hiss of water, and the pounding storm overhead. Cole kept close, behind Keanu, his earlier challenge forgotten. His eyes locked on every signal, his movements mirroring them without hesitation. Pride no longer mattered. Only survival did. He leaned into turns with the rest, his bike slicing through puddles, spray kicking high but his balance sure. And though he would never admit it out loud, he felt safer with Keanu in front. The support truck trailed carefully, wipers straining to push the deluge off the glass. Emily pressed both palms against the fogging window, her breath quick and shallow. She could see the flashes of Keanu's headlight, the glow cutting through the storm like a guide star. Her wide eyes followed every motion, every signal, the way the riders behind him moved as though tethered to his lead. She whispered softly, almost like a prayer, "He's keeping them safe." Her father glanced at her, then back at the riders, his knuckles tight on the wheel. The truth was undeniable. The man in the plain jacket, once mocked as an outsider, now carried the weight of the group's safety on his shoulders. The road turned treacherous again, dipping into a valley where rainwater pooled across the asphalt like a river. Keanu slowed the line with a clear hand signal, then pointed to the shallowest stretch. One by one, the bikes followed his line, cutting through the flood at a crawl. Spray rose in sheets, but no rider tipped, no machine stalled. When the last wheel cleared the water, a collective exhale passed through the group, though no one spoke it aloud. The storm still howled, but something in the way they moved had changed. Doubt had been drowned by the rain. What remained was trust. Fragile, but growing stronger. With every mile, they followed his light. The storm did not let up. Each mile felt longer than the last, the world reduced to a tunnel of rain, headlights, and the spray of water from spinning tires. The road pitched into another curve, slick and unforgiving, its guardrails glistening like wet steel. Keanu lifted his arm high, signaling the bend, then angled his bike into the turn with flawless control. One by one, the veterans followed, their trust so complete now that not a single rider hesitated. Cole leaned hard, water streaming off his helmet. He was close enough to see every detail of Keanu's movements, the steady roll of his shoulders, the way his tires never strayed an inch from the safest line. For a man he had mocked only hours before, Keanu now felt like the anchor holding the group together. The pack moved as one body. The hand signals rippled backward like waves, past rider to rider until even those far in the rear mirrored the motions without delay. In a storm where visibility was nearly gone, they had become a chain of faith, linked not by words, but by action. Emily clutched the edge of her seat in the truck, her little face pale against the glass. Her father gripped the steering wheel with both hands, the truck tires fighting the flooded ruts in the road. "He's showing them the way," Emily whispered, her voice filled with awe. They'd be lost without him. Her father's silence was heavy. He couldn't deny what his daughter saw so clearly. The veterans' men, hardened by war, scarred by loss, guarded by pride, were following a man who never once demanded their trust. He had earned it, moment by moment, signal by signal, mile by mile. The rain thickened, hammering the helmets until the sound was deafening. But through it all, Keanu's light continued to flash, his signal sharp, his lead unbroken. He slowed them where the road was dangerous, guided them through flooded sections, and pointed out fallen branches littering the highway. Every decision kept the formation alive, every motion binding them tighter together. The storm became more than weather. It was a test, a crucible. And in the heart of it, the man they thought didn't belong was proving, without a single boast, that belonging was never about words, it was about showing up when it mattered. Finally, the road stretched into a long, straight passage. The storm still poured, but the horizon glowed faintly with a break in the clouds. The riders could feel that the miles behind them had been survived, and the finish line ahead was no longer just a hope. Emily leaned her forehead against the window, whispering, as though speaking it aloud might jinx it. "They're going to make it. He's going to get them there." Her father exhaled slowly, his voice quiet. "Yeah, looks like he will." And as the formation thundered through the rain, the veterans no longer thought of him as an outsider. They thought of him as the man who had led them through the storm, the beacon who turned doubt into trust. The storm loosened its grip at last. The rain softened, tapering into a fine drizzle, then into mist that clung low across the road. The sky cracked open slowly, streaks of pale sunlight piercing through the gray. For the first time in miles, the riders could see more than a few yards ahead. The horizon stretched clear, the road shining wet and silver beneath the breaking light. One by one, the veterans tilted their helmets skyward. They didn't slow, not yet, but the change was undeniable. They had weathered the worst together. The storm had not scattered them, had not broken them. They had come through intact, every wheel still on the pavement, every rider still upright. Keanu eased the throttle just enough to let the formation gather tighter. His signals remained steady, even though the danger had lessened. It wasn't about caution alone. It was about discipline, about finishing the ride the way they had started the storm, together. Cole rode close behind, his eyes locked on the man who had led them through the darkness. The bitterness that had colored his voice earlier was gone. His pride still sat in his chest, but it was tempered now, reshaped by what he had witnessed. He leaned into the turns with Keanu, not as a rival, but as a partner, his bike shadowing the line without hesitation. The support truck rattled along the wet highway, its windshield streaked with water. Emily pressed her face so hard against the glass that her breath left little clouds. Her small hand tapped the window in excitement. "Daddy, look! The sun's coming out!" Her father followed her gaze. The road ahead gleamed under a rising glow, the storm clouds splitting like heavy curtains. His lips pressed tight, but relief showed in his eyes. Against every doubt, they were going to make it. The distant sound of cheering drifted faintly through the air. At first, it was hard to tell if it was real or imagined, a trick of tired minds and ringing ears. But as the group pressed forward, the voices grew clearer. Families gathered at the finish line, waiting with flags and signs, their shouts cutting through the thinning rain. The riders pushed on, engines thundering louder now, not in defiance of the storm, but in triumph over it. Tires splashed through the last puddles as the line rolled out of the mist and into the open clearing where the lakeside park spread wide. The crowd erupted. Families surged forward, waving banners, clapping, shouting names. Children jumped and cheered, their voices high and joyful. For the loved ones waiting, seeing every rider intact was the victory. The veterans began to slow, easing their throttles, their bikes rumbling lower as they entered the park. Helmets turned toward one another, silent acknowledgments, passing in glances and nods. They had made it. They had come through as one. Keanu pulled into the front row, his bike dripping with rainwater, his gloves heavy and slick. He did not rev the engine for attention, did not raise his arms in celebration. He simply rolled to a stop, killed the motor, and sat still for a breath, the silence ringing louder than applause. Engines idled as the veterans found spaces in the park to line up their bikes. The roar faded slowly until the only sounds were dripping water, the rustle of flags, and the cheers of the families rushing forward. Boots splashed in shallow puddles as children darted past, waving banners, their voices shrill with relief and joy. Keanu removed his helmet, rain-slick hair falling across his face. He tugged at the soaked gloves, peeling them free one finger at a time, then set them across his handlebars. His breathing was steady, his expression calm. He didn't raise his arms or seek the crowd's attention. He simply nodded once, respectful, as though acknowledging that the finish line wasn't about him, but about the men and women who had ridden beside him. Cole rolled in behind him, easing his bike into a spot just a few feet away. He killed the engine and sat in silence, the weight of what had just happened pressing down heavier than the storm itself. His earlier sneers and sharp remarks seemed foolish now, washed away like dust under the rain. He removed his helmet slowly, his eyes landing on Keanu. For once, there was no hostility there, only humility, quiet and raw. Other veterans parked in the same row, forming a line behind Keanu rather than ahead. It was a silent gesture, unplanned but meaningful. They had mocked him, doubted him, tested him, but now their actions spoke louder than words. By choosing to place their bikes behind his, they acknowledged what they could no longer deny. He had led them when they needed it most. Emily burst from the support truck, racing through the puddles with her shoes splashing water in every direction. She waved frantically, calling to her father. "They're all safe. They all made it." Her small voice carried above the crowd, pure joy in every syllable. Her father caught up, slower but steady. His eyes swept the formation of riders, lingering on Keanu. The man had walked into their world as an outsider, doubted and dismissed. Yet here he was, standing tall, water dripping from his jacket, his glove still clenched in his hand. The father gave a short nod in Keanu's direction, a quiet acknowledgement that spoke volumes. The crowd pressed closer, cheering each veteran by name. Families embraced riders as they dismounted, tears mixing with the rain still sliding off helmets and jackets. Yet even in the joy of reunion, more than a few eyes turned toward the man who stood apart, quiet and humble, acknowledging cheers only with slight bows of his head. Cole finally stepped off his bike and walked the few paces to stand near him. His voice was low, almost drowned by the applause. "Didn't think you'd make it. Didn't think I'd make it either. Guess I was wrong on both counts." Keanu looked at him, his expression unchanged. "The road asked us to finish. That's all that mattered." Cole gave a faint, rueful chuckle. "Respect, then." He extended a hand, not as a challenge this time, but as a gesture of brotherhood. Keanu gripped it firmly. Around them, the cheering continued, but for the veterans, that single handshake carried more weight than any applause. The rain clouds had drifted on, leaving the park washed clean in the late afternoon light. Damp grass sparkled beneath the sun, and puddles reflected the colors of the flags still waving in the hands of children. The smell of wet asphalt and smoke from extinguished grills lingered in the air, blending with the laughter and relief of families reunited. The riders gathered slowly, peeling off their jackets and shaking the water from their gloves. Helmets clinked against handlebars as they were set down. No one rushed. They moved with a kind of deliberate slowness that came after surviving something that had demanded all of them. A natural circle formed near the bikes, veterans stepping in one by one until they stood shoulder to shoulder. Their voices were low at first, the storm still heavy in their chests, but soon the stories began to flow. "You remember Kandahar?" one man said, his voice rough with age. "Storm rolled in, out of nowhere. Lightning so close, it lit the desert up like midday." Another nodded, rubbing his hands together as though feeling that old cold again. "Vietnam. Monsoon season. Couldn't see your own rifle in front of your face. Mud swallowed half the platoon's boots before we made it to high ground. A third man, younger, but still carrying lines etched deep by years, added, Afghanistan, mountain pass, snowstorm came down fast. We weren't sure if we'd ever get out of it. But we did, because somebody took the lead when no one else could. Their words carried weight, not as boasts, but as acknowledgments. The storms of war had nearly broken them, yet leadership had carried them through. Cole stood among them, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His gaze drifted toward Keanu, who lingered just outside the circle. He hadn't stepped forward, hadn't spoken. He stood with the same quiet presence he had carried since the morning, watching, listening, letting the veterans have their space. But Cole's chest rose with a breath that felt heavier than air. He uncrossed his arms, letting them fall to his sides, and his voice cut through the circle. I thought he was just a Hollywood guy, he said, his tone stripped of sarcasm. The words came raw, honest, but out there, in the storm, he rode like one of us. The circle went still. Eyes turned toward Keanu, not with skepticism, not with laughter, but with silence that carried respect. The veterans who had mocked now stood humbled, their judgment cracked wide open by the truth they had witnessed with their own eyes. Keanu shifted slightly, uncomfortable with the weight of their stares. He dipped his head, acknowledging Cole's words without basking in them. He didn't need the validation. The road had spoken for him already. In that moment, a patter of small footsteps broke the silence. Emily darted across the wet grass, her shoes splashing through puddles as she raced toward Keanu. Her hair clung damply to her face, her little arms pumping with determination. She reached him breathless, grabbing onto his soaked sleeve with both hands. "Thank you," she blurted, her voice high but steady. "Thank you for keeping my daddy safe." The crowd softened. Eyes misted. A few veterans glanced away, blinking hard against emotions they thought they had buried long ago. For them, the words of a child carried more weight than medals or speeches. Keanu looked down at Emily, his eyes gentle. He knelt, so he was level with her, rain still dripping from his hair. "He's strong," Keanu said softly, nodding toward her father. "He didn't need me to keep him safe, but I was proud to ride beside him." Emily's eyes shone. She squeezed his sleeve tighter before letting go, her smile wide and unguarded. The circle, once doubtful and closed, began to open. And for the first time, they saw the man not as Hollywood, not as an outsider, but as one of them. Emily's father stepped forward, his boots heavy on the damp grass. He paused just behind his daughter, his eyes fixed on Keanu. For most of the day, his silence had been guarded, his judgment hard. But now, as he looked at the man kneeling in front of his child, he felt something shift deep within him. "She's right," he said finally, his voice gravelly, thickened by the storm and by memories of battles long past. "You kept us steady out there. You didn't have to, but you did." The circle tightened again, this time not in suspicion, but in solidarity. The men who had survived storms of war understood the weight of those words. Leadership wasn't about barking orders or claiming titles. It was about stepping up when chaos threatened to tear everything apart. One of the older veterans raised his voice. "You led with your hands, not your mouth. That's the way we were trained. You didn't need to prove yourself by talking. You proved it by getting us through." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. Heads nodded, shoulders relaxed. The resistance that had clung to them earlier in the day dissolved like fog burned away by sunlight. Cole exhaled slowly, stepping closer to Keanu. "I gave you hell when you showed up. Didn't think you belonged anywhere near us. But I'll say this straight, if you hadn't been out front, I'm not sure we'd all be standing here right now." Keanu rose to his feet, water dripping from the cuffs of his jacket. He shook his head slightly, his voice quiet but firm. "You were never following me. You were following the road. I just kept the signals clear." But his humility didn't erase what the others had felt. For them, it wasn't just about mechanics or signals. It was about the steadiness he had carried into the storm, the calm that had spread through the line when panic could have broken it. The veterans exchanged looks, the kind of glances men share when words fall short. Some clapped Cole on the shoulder. Others simply stared at Keanu with a respect they had never expected to feel. Emily tugged at her father's hand, still looking at Keanu with wide eyes. "He's not like the others," said Daddy. "He's different." Her father crouched down beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. His voice cracked as he replied, "Yeah, sweetheart, he is." Around them, the park hummed with the energy of relief and reunion. Families hugged their riders, children climbed onto shoulders, flags waved high. But in the center of it all, the circle of veterans stood with Keanu, no longer an outsider but a part of their story. For the first time since arriving that morning, the man in the plain jacket wasn't judged by what patch he wore or didn't wear. He was judged by the miles he had carried them through, by the storm he had led them out of, and by the trust he had earned when it mattered most. The community, once skeptical and divided, now saw him differently, not as a star, not as a stranger, but as a brother on the road. The sun had finally broken through the clouds, scattering golden light across the lakeside park. The air carried the scent of damp grass and charcoal smoke from the grills that had gone cold during the storm. Families clustered around picnic tables and folding chairs, their relief still tangible, their laughter more vibrant after the tension of the ride. Near the water's edge, a wooden stage had been set up for the day's ceremony. Flags rippled in the soft breeze, their reflections dancing on the surface of the lake. A few organizers adjusted microphones and shuffled through papers, preparing to deliver the usual speeches of gratitude and remembrance. The veterans gathered in rows before the stage, their jackets heavy with patches and insignias. Their families stood close, children perched on shoulders, spouses clutching hands. The storm had left them soaked, but it had also bonded them in a way no fair-weather ride ever could. The announcer stepped forward, tapping the mic. His voice carried across the clearing, warm with gratitude. "Today we honor not just the miles we rode, but the spirit of those who served and those who continue to ride in their memory. Every year, this fundraiser reminds us of the sacrifices made and the strength carried forward." Applause rose, steady and heartfelt. Names were called. Tokens of appreciation presented. Veterans stepped forward to receive small awards, medallions, or certificates. Each gesture was simple, but each meant more than words could measure. When the last name was called, the announcer smiled, closing his folder. "And now," he said, "we'd like to invite everyone to turn their attention to our riders. Brothers, sisters, you carried the banner again this year." The applause grew louder, rolling across the clearing like the echo of their engines. Keanu stood near the back, his jacket still plain, no patches sewn onto the sleeves. He clapped along with the others, his presence quiet, his expression humble. Then, something unexpected happened. Cole stepped forward. His boots struck the wooden planks of the stage with a deliberate weight. He didn't glance at the announcer, didn't need the microphone. He turned toward the other veterans, then toward the crowd, his voice carrying without effort. "There's one more thing," he said, "something that isn't on the program." A hush spread across the clearing. Conversation stilled. The air shifted as eyes followed Cole's gaze straight toward Keanu. "He showed up this morning, and I thought he didn't belong," Cole admitted, his voice rough but honest. "I thought he was just a Hollywood man, trying to play at our life. But when the storm came, he didn't play. He led. He kept us together when the road tried to scatter us. He earned something today." Cole reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a patch. It was small, but unmistakable, an insignia reserved for brothers in arms, a symbol not given lightly. The crowd recognized it instantly, and the silence deepened. Cole stepped off the stage, walking straight toward Keanu. The crowd parted for him, their eyes wide. Keanu stood still, his chest tightening as the veteran approached. Cole stopped in front of him, holding the patch in his calloused hand. No words followed. He simply extended it. The patch rested in Cole's palm, its fabric dark against the rough skin of his hand. Around them, The crowd held its breath. The air was heavy with expectation, yet no one dared to speak. Even the lake seemed still, its surface unbroken as though nature itself waited for this moment to unfold. Keanu's eyes lowered to the insignia. He knew its meaning. He had seen enough of these patches on worn jackets and weathered vests to understand. They weren't just symbols. They were stories, sewn into cloth stories of blood, sacrifice, loyalty, and brotherhood. They weren't handed out at ceremonies or bought in stores. They were earned on the road and in battlefields most would never see. Cole's hand trembled slightly, but his voice was steady. This doesn't go to outsiders. It doesn't go to men who just show up for a ride. It goes to brothers who prove themselves when it counts. Today, you proved it. The silence deepened. Children in the crowd clutched their parents' hands. Veterans who had once mocked now stood with their heads bowed, their faces solemn. Keanu reached out slowly, his fingers brushing against the patch. But instead of taking it immediately, he looked into Cole's eyes. What he saw there wasn't pity or ceremony. It was respect, the kind forged only in shared trial. "I didn't do it alone," Keanu said quietly. His voice carried enough to reach the crowd. "Every one of you held the line. I just kept the signals clear." Cole's jaw tightened, but a faint smile ghosted across his weathered face. "Humility suits you. But this," he pressed the patch into Keanu's hand, "this suits you too." For several long seconds, no one moved. Keanu stood frozen, the patch heavy in his grip, heavier than any award or trophy he had ever been given. Around him, the world faded into silence. The applause withheld, the cheers stilled. It wasn't a moment for noise, it was a moment for reverence. He bowed his head, his shoulders lowering under the weight of the gesture. His throat tightened, his words caught somewhere between gratitude and disbelief. He didn't raise the patch high or pin it to his jacket. He simply held it close to his chest, his hand trembling slightly as he whispered, "Thank you." The veterans in the circle straightened, their silence louder than any ovation. A few wiped at their eyes. Others placed hands on their hearts. None spoke because none needed to. Minutes passed in that sacred quiet. The crowd did not fidget, did not stir. They simply stood with him, letting the weight of the moment settle. Finally, Cole broke the stillness with a low murmur, meant only for Keanu, but heard by those closest. "You're one of us now." The words rippled through the circle, felt more than heard. For Keanu, it was not about belonging to a club or earning a token. It was about something deeper, about trust, about brotherhood, about being seen, not for the roles he played on screen, but for the man he had shown himself to be when the storm raged. When the applause finally came, it was slow, rising like the roll of thunder across the park. It was not wild or celebratory. It was steady, respectful, a tribute to the man who had earned the patch the hard way. And Keanu, his head still bowed, accepted it not with pride but with humility, knowing this was a moment he would carry for the rest of his life. As the sun dipped low over the lake, the veterans gathered near a fire pit built from heavy stones. Flames flickered to life, fed by logs stacked high by the organizers. The orange glow reached into the darkening evening, warming faces still streaked with the memory of rain. Smoke curled into the sky, carrying with it the scent of charred wood and the unspoken relief of survival. The riders sat in a loose circle, their jackets hanging heavy on their shoulders, their helmets resting at their sides. Families lingered nearby, children playing in the grass, until the dusk called them closer to the warmth. Conversation started softly, almost hesitant, before deepening into the kind of sharing only storms and silence could coax out. One veteran leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring into the fire. His voice was gravelly. "I remember Iraq. Convoy duty. Dust storms rolling in so thick you couldn't see the man standing beside you. We thought we'd lose half the trucks that day, but we didn't. Somebody up front kept signaling, kept us together, inch by inch. Felt a lot like today." Another nodded, his eyes glistening with reflection. "Vietnam 1969. Rain came down so heavy it drowned our radios. Couldn't hear a damn thing. Only reason we made it back was because we followed the hand of one sergeant. He didn't make it home, but his signals carried us farther than his voice ever could. The circle grew quieter, the flames crackling as the weight of memory settled over them. For a moment, the fire wasn't just wood and heat. It was the glow of campfires in faraway lands, the light that had steadied them in nights of fear. Cole cleared his throat, his rough voice breaking the silence. Afghanistan, mountain pass, snowstorm came in fast, whiteout so thick I couldn't tell sky from ground. Thought I'd lose my squad, but we made it. You know why? Because when one man led, we followed. Didn't matter who he was, didn't matter where he came from. What mattered was he didn't quit. His eyes flicked toward Keanu, the meaning clear. The firelight caught on his weathered face, softening the hard lines. Keanu sat among them, his plain jacket damp at the cuffs, his hands resting loosely on his knees. He didn't try to match their stories. He didn't compare his life to theirs. He simply listened, his gaze steady, his presence quiet but unyielding. When he did speak, it was only to ask gentle questions. What kept you going out there? He asked one man who spoke of losing a brother in battle. The veteran looked into the fire, then replied, "Him. I wasn't going to let it end with me." Another told of a medic who patched wounds under fire, hands shaking but never stopping. Keanu leaned slightly closer. "What was his name?" he asked. The man smiled faintly through the sorrow. "Jackson. He'd have liked you." The veteran shared, and Keanu received. His silence was not emptiness. It was respect. He made space for their voices, their ghosts, their truths. Emily curled up against her father's side, her small hands tucked into his jacket. She listened with wide eyes, too young to grasp the full weight of the stories, but old enough to feel the pride. She whispered to her father, "They're not just strong, they're brave." Her father wrapped an arm around her, nodding slowly. "Braver than most ever know." The fire crackled, and the circle leaned closer. The storm outside, replaced by the warmth of memory and the healing of shared burdens. The fire burned lower, its flames no longer wild but steady, glowing embers casting soft light across the circle. The veterans' faces reflected that same glow lines of sorrow, pride, and relief written deep into their features. For once, the usual defenses that hardened their expressions were lowered. One man, tall and wiry with a deep scar across his cheek, shifted in his seat. His voice trembled as he spoke. "We lost 3 men in Fallujah. Never thought I'd talk about it again. But tonight, I feel like I should. They deserve to be remembered." He named each one slowly. The syllables weighted with reverence. The firelight caught the moisture in his eyes, though he didn't look away or hide it. Others followed. Names were spoken into the night. Stories of brothers who never came home. The circle didn't interrupt, didn't try to soften the grief. They let it rise, let it exist, honoring it with silence, before another voice carried on. Keanu listened with the same intensity he had shown on the road. His eyes didn't wander. His posture never shifted in impatience. He leaned forward slightly whenever someone spoke, as though each story was the most important one he had ever heard. When a pause came, he asked another quiet question. "Do you ever feel like the road helps you carry them?" His voice was soft but clear, the question born of genuine curiosity, not performance. Several veterans nodded. Cole answered first. "Every mile we ride, they're with us. The ones we lost, they don't disappear. The road keeps them alive." A murmur of agreement swept through the group. One man raised his fist gently toward the fire, a silent toast to those no longer there. Others mirrored the gesture, heads bowed. Emily stirred in her father's lap, her eyelids heavy, but her ears still open. "Daddy," she whispered, "they're heroes." Her father kissed the top of her head, his voice low. "Yes, they are. Every single one." The fire popped, sparks drifting into the night sky. Families who had drawn closer now stood quietly at the edge of the circle, listening. Some wiped away tears. Others wrapped arms around loved ones tighter. The stories were painful, but they were also healing. Keanu finally spoke again. His words measured. "I didn't serve like you did. I can't claim to know what you've carried. But I do know this. When I rode with you today, I felt something I'll never forget. It wasn't just about finishing the ride. It was about finishing it together." The veterans absorbed his words in silence. They didn't need him to say more. His humility, his willingness to listen rather than speak, had already shown them enough. Cole leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You listened. That's more than most people ever do. Sometimes, that's all we need." The circle tightened once more, not in formality, but in kinship. The fire glowed between them, their stories woven into the smoke rising into the night. What had begun as skepticism and mockery had transformed into something no storm could erase: trust, respect, and the quiet strength of community. Emily finally closed her eyes, drifting into sleep against her father's chest, safe in the circle of men who had fought storms both on battlefields and on the road. And as the fire dimmed, the bond among them burned brighter than ever. The fire pit had burned low, leaving only glowing embers behind. Families drifted off to their tents, voices quiet, laughter fading into the night. The lake shimmered faintly under the rising moon, its surface rippling with the last whispers of the storm. Keanu walked back to his own small tent, pitched on the edge of the clearing. It wasn't large or luxurious, just a simple canvas shelter, the kind any rider could set up in minutes. He ducked inside, the air warm and damp, scented with earth and rain. Droplets slipped from the seams, pattering softly into a tin cup set by the entrance. He pulled off his jacket, heavy with water and streaked with grease. His gloves were stiff, still stained from the fuel line he had fixed hours earlier. He laid them neatly to the side before reaching into his pack. From it, he drew out a small, worn notebook bound in leather. Its corners were frayed, the pages filled with inked thoughts and reflections from years of journeys. Sitting cross-legged on the ground, he opened to a blank page. He picked up a pen, paused, then began to write. The scratch of ink against paper mingled with the rhythm of the dripping rain. "Today reminded me of something I've always believed," he wrote. "Respect is not claimed. It isn't demanded. It's earned through service, through humility, through showing up when others expect you to walk away." He set the pen down for a moment, flexing his fingers still darkened with grease. He rubbed them absently with a rag, though the stains remained stubborn. The marks didn't bother him. If anything, they grounded him, reminders of the work he had chosen to do without hesitation. He thought of Cole, his scowl in the morning, the disbelief in his voice, the shift in his eyes when the engine roared back to life. He thought of Emily, her tiny hand tugging at his sleeve, her voice whispering thank you with the pure weight of a child's honesty. And he thought of the veterans at the fire, their stories. Spilling into the night, their walls lowered just enough to let him glimpse the pain and pride they carried. Picking up the pen again, he continued, "I came here with no patch, no history in their battles, no right to their trust. But the road doesn't ask for titles. The road asks for truth. And when the storm came, truth meant riding steady, keeping the signals clear, making sure no one was left behind." The tent shuddered gently as another breeze passed. A drop of water slid down from the canvas roof and landed near his page, smearing the ink slightly. He didn't mind. It was fitting that the storm left its mark, even here. He sat back for a moment, letting silence fill the space. His chest rose with a slow breath, not of exhaustion, but of gratitude. He hadn't set out that morning to prove anything, but the day had given him something more valuable than recognition. It had given him connection. He closed his eyes briefly, hearing again the steady hum of engines following his signals, the quiet respect in the circle of veterans, the small voice of a girl calling him a protector. Keanu opened his eyes again and leaned forward, pen back in hand. The page glistened faintly under the lantern light, its ink smudged in places from the rain, but still legible. "I've spent much of my life playing roles," he wrote. "Heroes, fighters, men who save the day. But tonight reminded me that real strength is not in the spotlight. It's in the quiet choices, the steady hand when others falter, the willingness to kneel in the dirt and fix what's broken. He paused, hearing the faint laughter of children still awake in the distance, the gentle murmur of veterans swapping softer stories now about family, about hopes, about ordinary life. A faint smile touched his lips. "I saw what service really means tonight," he continued. "It's not medals or applause, it's presence. It's the ability to listen when someone shares their scars. It's letting humility guide your steps instead of pride." His fingers brushed over the fresh patch lying on the floor beside him. The insignia Cole had pressed into his palm. He hadn't sewn it onto his jacket yet. He wasn't sure if he ever would. But its weight beside him was undeniable. He picked it up, ran his thumb over the stitched edges, then set it carefully back down. "That patch," he wrote, "was not a gift. It was trust. It is a reminder that respect must always be carried with care. I will hold it close, not for what it says about me, but for what it says about them. They let me in. They let me share their road." The lantern flickered as the breeze pressed against the canvas. Raindrops pattered again, softer now, like the last breath of the storm. He listened, letting the rhythm of water calm him. Gratitude swelled in his chest, not the kind that demanded expression, but the quiet kind that lived deep, unshakable. He finished the page with one last line. "I am thankful, not for being seen, but for being allowed to serve." Setting the pen down, he closed the notebook gently. He slid it back into his pack, where pages of other reflections rested from journeys past. He lay back on his cot, folding his hands over his chest, the faint stain of grease still clinging to his knuckles. Outside, voices faded as the camp settled into rest. The crackle of the fire pit dwindled, replaced by the steady chorus of crickets and the lapping of waves against the lakeshore. Keanu let the sounds wash over him, his breathing steady, his mind at peace. The storm had tested them. The road had bound them. And tonight, under the dripping canvas of his tent, he carried the truth with quiet gratitude. Respect wasn't something you wore on a jacket. It was something you lived. Moment by moment, mile by mile. He reached out once more, fingers brushing the patch before letting his hand fall to his side. His eyes drifted closed. Rain tapped softly above him, a lullaby from the sky, and with it came the stillness of a man content not with recognition, but with the honor of having earned trust in silence. The camp had quieted. Only the faint murmur of the lake and the steady chirp of crickets filled the night. Lanterns glowed dimly outside a few tents, but most families had already settled into sleep. The fire pit had burned down to glowing embers, sending up thin ribbons of smoke that drifted lazily into the dark sky. Inside his tent, Keanu lay back on his cot, still dressed in his plain shirt and jeans, the patch Cole had given him resting on the pack beside his pillow. He wasn't asleep yet. His mind lingered on the day, the storm, the hand signals, the faces of the veterans as they opened their hearts around the fire. He had written down his reflections earlier, but the weight of it all still hummed in his chest. The canvas rustled lightly. At first, Keanu thought it was just the breeze, or the drip of water still trickling from the trees. But then came the faintest sound of footsteps, small ones, hesitant. A shadow slipped across the lantern light outside his tent. Keanu sat up slowly, listening. A moment later, the flap moved aside, and Emily peeked in. Her eyes were wide, shining in the dim light, her little hands clutching something pressed tightly against her chest. "Hi," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the rustle of the canvas. Keanu smiled softly, motioning her inside. "Hey, shouldn't you be asleep?" She stepped in, careful not to track mud from her shoes, and shook her head. "I couldn't. I had to give you this." She held out the object she'd been clutching. It was a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges from her grip. Crayon colors peeked from the folds, blue, green, and streaks of orange. Keanu took it gently, unfolding it with care. The drawing spread open across the page. A line of motorcycles under dark gray clouds, bright streaks of lightning slashing the sky. At the front, was a simple figure in niter black, his headlight glowing like a star, guiding the others through the storm. At the bottom, in shaky but determined handwriting, were the words, "You kept my daddy safe." Keanu's breath caught. His throat tightened as his eyes traced every crayon line, every uneven letter. It wasn't art in the polished sense. It was something far greater. It was the truth, as seen through the eyes of a child. Emily fidgeted, her hands twisting the hem of her shirt. "I drew it after the fire. I wanted you to know. Everyone's happy you fixed the bike and kept the ride together. But I'm happy because my daddy came back. Because of you." Keanu lowered the page slowly, his eyes shimmering in the lantern light. He tried to speak, but the words tangled in his chest. Instead, he placed a hand over his heart and gave her a slow, steady nod. Emily's face softened into a small smile, as though that gesture was enough. She didn't need speeches or promises. She just needed to know he understood. Outside, the night was calm, the storm now only a memory. But in Keanu's hands, the crayon drawing felt heavier than any medal, any patch, any recognition. It was the purest gift he had received all day. Keanu carefully folded the drawing again, his fingers lingering on the creased paper. He slid it into the pocket of his jacket, close to where the patch rested. Both tokens, different in form, carried the same weight of trust. One had been earned from hardened men who had survived battlefields. The other came from a child whose world revolved around the safety of her father. He looked back at Emily. "This means more than you know," he said softly. His voice was steady, but his eyes shimmered with emotion he didn't try to hide. Emily's shoulders lifted in a shy shrug. "It's just a picture." "No," Keanu replied, shaking his head slowly. "It's more than a picture. It's your heart, and that's something I'll never forget." Emily's cheeks flushed pink. She smiled, then leaned forward to wrap her small arms around him. The hug was quick, awkward in its innocence, but it carried the kind of sincerity that silenced everything else. When she pulled back, her eyes were heavy with sleep, but she lingered a moment longer. "Promise you'll keep it?" she asked. Keanu nodded. "Always." Satisfied, Emily finally slipped back toward the tent flap. She glanced over her shoulder once more before ducking out into the night. Her small figure disappeared into the glow of another lantern where her father waited, arms crossed but expression softened. He gave Keanu a short nod, one father to another man, and guided his daughter back into their tent. Keanu sat still for a long time, listening as the camp settled further into silence. He could hear the faint snores of riders, the distant hush of the lake against the shore, the wind sighing through the trees. Yet his thoughts lingered only on the crayon lines of Emily's drawing and the simple message written beneath them. "You kept my daddy safe." The words echoed in his mind, heavy and humbling. He thought of all the roles he had played in films: protectors, warriors, men who fought against impossible odds. But none of those scripts, none of those crafted lines, could match the truth of this moment. Here, there were no cameras, no lights, no audience. Just a child, her father, and a storm survived. He exhaled slowly, closing his eyes. In that breath, he realized the deepest reward was never the patch pressed into his palm or the applause of a grateful crowd. It was this: the trust of a child who saw him not as a star, not as an outsider, but as someone who had stood steady when it mattered most. The rain tapped faintly on the canvas again, soft and rhythmic, like a lullaby. Keanu lay back on his cot, one hand resting over his jacket pocket where the note was tucked safely. His eyes closed, but his chest remained full, warmed not by the fire outside, but by the gift of innocence and gratitude he had been given. The storm was behind them. The miles were done. But the drawing and its message would ride with him forever. Morning broke gently over the lakeside park. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of wet pine and damp soil. Mist hovered low across the water, slowly giving way as the rising sun painted the surface gold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean. Keanu rose early, before most of the camp had stirred. He rolled up his tent quietly, his movements unhurried but deliberate. His jacket hung nearby, still bearing the faint stains of grease and rain. He slipped it on, the weight of the folded patch and Emily's note tucked safely in the inside pocket pressing lightly against his chest. By the time he wheeled his bike toward the road, the veterans had already gathered. One by one, they emerged from their tents, jackets on, boots laced. They lined up in silence near the fire pit, their eyes following his every step. The mocking looks from the first morning were gone. In their place was something heavier, something steadier, respect. Keanu stopped at the edge of the circle, resting his hand briefly on the seat of his bike. He looked at them quietly, no need for words. His eyes spoke enough gratitude, humility, and the quiet bond they had forged in the storm. Cole stepped forward. His boots sank slightly in the damp grass, his posture straighter than it had been in years. He stopped in front of Keanu, studying him for a long moment. The sarcasm that had once sharpened his words was nowhere to be found. His jaw worked once before he extended his hand. "Brother," he said simply. Keanu gripped it firmly. No flourish, no performance. Just a handshake that carried weight heavier than speeches. Cole's eyes softened, the lines of stubborn pride giving way to something deeper acceptance. Behind him, the other veterans lifted their hands in salute. Not the rigid, formal salute of parade grounds, but the quiet gesture of men who had fought, lost, and survived. It was their way of saying farewell, of acknowledging the man who had entered as an outsider but left as one of them. Keanu bowed his head, moved by the silence more than he would have been by applause. The salute lingered, unbroken, until he swung his leg over the bike and settled into the seat. Engines began to rumble as riders climbed onto their machines, the sound building slowly like thunder rolling across the hills. It wasn't the mocking roar of challenge anymore. It was steady, reverent, an echo of respect. Keanu started his bike, the engine answering with a deep growl. The line of veterans fell in behind him, their machines forming a guard of honor as he rolled toward the road. The camp faded into the distance, the sound of families waving them off, swallowed by the rising roar. The sun broke fully over the horizon, casting their shadows long across the pavement. And for Keanu, with the patch and the note resting close to his heart, every mile ahead carried the weight of brotherhood, earned, not given. The line of motorcycles rolled slowly out of the park, engines humming low as if even the machines understood the weight of the moment. Gravel crunched beneath their tires until they hit the smooth asphalt of the open road. Families stood at the entrance, waving flags, their voices rising in a chorus of cheers that chased the riders into the morning light. Keanu rode at the front for a time, not because he demanded the lead, but because the veterans had chosen it for him. Cole and the others followed closely behind, their headlights flashing in rhythm, a formation born not from obligation, but from respect. The ride wasn't long, only a few miles down the highway, but every second stretched with significance. The storm that had once threatened to scatter them now felt like a memory etched into their bond. Every rider could still feel the sting of the rain, the fear of the slick turns, and the steadiness of the signals that had guided them through. Keanu's thoughts drifted as the miles passed. He felt the patch pressing faintly against his chest, Emily's note folded safely beside it. One token born of hardened men, the other born of a child's simple trust. Both carried the same message. Belonging wasn't about bloodlines or reputation. It was about standing firm when it mattered most. At a crossroads outside town, the formation slowed. Engines idled, the roar settling into a low rumble. One by one, the riders pulled to the shoulder, their bikes lined neatly in a row. The veterans dismounted, standing tall as Keanu eased his own machine to a stop. Cole approached again, his face calmer than the night before. "This is where we split," he said, his voice steady. "But before we do, I want you to know, you've got brothers on this road now. Anytime you ride, you won't ride alone." The other veterans nodded, their silence carrying the weight of their agreement. Some placed hands on their hearts, others gave short nods of respect, but none turned away. Keanu dismounted, resting his helmet on the seat. He looked at them each in turn, his voice quiet but clear. "Thank you for letting me share the road with you. I won't forget it." Cole clasped his shoulder firmly. "And we won't forget you." There was no need for more words. The engine spoke for them as they mounted their bikes again, the thunder rising until it filled the sky. They saluted him once more before peeling off down the highway, their taillights glowing red against the pale morning. Keanu stood by his bike, watching them disappear into the horizon. The road stretched wide before him, endless and open. He slid the helmet back on, climbed into the seat, and revved the engine once. The sound rolled strong and steady, echoing through the trees. When he rode away, the sun was high enough to warm the road, casting his shadow long behind him. The patch and the note pressed against his heart with every mile, reminders that he carried something greater than recognition. He carried the trust of men, hardened by war, and the tektamsigent, gratitude of a child who had seen her father come home safe. The roar of his bike faded into the morning, but for those who had seen him ride, the memory would remain long after the sound was gone. The miles behind him felt heavy, yet freeing. Keanu reached his home. Late that evening, the sun gone, the quiet of the night settling around him. His motorcycle coasted into the driveway, its engine clicking softly as it cooled in the stillness. He dismounted slowly, stretching muscles still tight from the storm, and carried his jacket inside. The house was dark except for a small lamp in the corner. He set his helmet on a shelf and laid his gloves beside it, their leather stiff and stained from the long ride. His jacket came off next, and as he folded it across the chair, the weight of what lay inside shifted against the fabric. He reached into the pocket and withdrew two objects the patch Cole had pressed into his hand, and the folded drawing Emily had slipped him. He carried them to the nightstand beside his bed. He set the patch down first, the insignia glowing faintly under the light, its stitches firm, its meaning heavier than cloth. Then he unfolded the paper again, smoothing it with careful fingers. The crayon lines showed the storm, the riders, and the figure leading them forward. At the bottom, in uneven handwriting, the words still spoke louder than any speech. "You kept my daddy safe." Keanu sat on the edge of the bed, staring at both tokens. His chest tightened, his breath deepening, as the weight of the day poured over him again. He remembered the storm in every detail, the hiss of tires on slick roads, the hand signals passed back through the line, the way doubt had turned slowly into trust. He remembered the circle at the fire, the voices breaking as veterans named the brothers they had lost, and the silence that had followed when Cole placed the patch in his hand. He whispered softly into the quiet, "Respect isn't something you claim, it's something you earn." The words weren't meant for anyone but himself, a reminder of what the storm had taught him once more. He leaned back, closing his eyes, letting the memories drift. The storm was no longer just weather. It was a mirror of the doubts he had walked into, of the skepticism that had greeted him at the rally. And it was also the proof that humility, service, and patience could cut through even the heaviest rain. When he opened his eyes again, his gaze returned to the patch and the note. The patch spoke of brotherhood, of trust earned among men who had fought storms far worse than rain. The note spoke of innocence, of gratitude untainted by pride or rank. Together they reminded him that the deepest rewards were not measured in applause or recognition, but in the quiet trust of those who chose to follow because they believed. The lamp hummed softly beside him. Outside, the rain had begun again, this time gentle, a lullaby against the roof. He listened, his heart steady. He knew that when he rose the next morning, he would carry both tokens with him, not pinned to his jacket, but tucked close, reminders that every road offered a chance to serve, to protect, to lead with humility. Keanu sat a long time with the patch and the folded drawing resting side by side on the nightstand. They were small, ordinary objects in the eyes of the world, but to him they carried more weight than awards, more permanence than trophies. The patch was a seal of brotherhood, a message that men who had once mocked him now trusted him enough to call him one of their own. The drawing was a child's simple truth, a declaration that safety mattered more than speed, and that her father's return meant everything. He thought back to the way Cole had offered his hand, not out of courtesy, but out of recognition. That handshake had closed a gap no speech could bridge. And Emily's hug, brief, awkward, but sincere, had carved itself into his memory just as deeply. Both gestures, one from a hardened veteran and one from a little girl, told the same story. Respect wasn't demanded. It was given when someone proved they were willing to stand in the storm for others. He leaned back on the bed, his eyes tracing the faint shadows on the ceiling as the rain tapped steadily against the glass. He considered how often people believed strength came from titles, fame, or wealth. Yet he had seen true strength on that road. Men bruised by war who still stood tall, children who carried the weight of their parents' battles with quiet courage, and the enduring bond that formed when trust was tested. His journal lay nearby, but he didn't open it again. Tonight, the reflection was already written in his heart. He knew that the lesson would travel with him into every role he played, every road he took. Fame had brought him to the rally, but it had been humility and service that had kept him there. He rose once more, adjusting the lamp so its glow fell directly on the patch in Emily's note. He wanted them to be the last things he saw before sleep claimed him. They reminded him that storms pass, but the bonds forged within them remain. Before turning out the light, he whispered a question into the quiet of the room. A question not for himself, but for anyone willing to listen. Would you ride into the storm for someone else's safety? The words hung in the silence like a challenge, but also like an invitation. It wasn't about motorcycles or rain. It was about the choices made in moments of doubt, the willingness to carry another through darkness. He let the silence answer. Then, with one last glance at the nightstand, he turned off the lamp. The screen fades to black, but the image lingers. A patch and a child's drawing resting side by side, their meaning greater than any spotlight. And for those listening, the call remains clear. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us if you would ride into the storm for someone else. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories, because sometimes the most unforgettable journeys are not about where you go, but about who you protect along the way.